Good afternoon, everyone on YouTube. My name is John Breyault. I am the Vice President of Public Policy, Telecommunications, and Fraud with the National Consumers League. We are a consumer advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. And one of our major campaigns is the website fraud.org, which is all about educating and empowering consumers to spot and avoid scams. Today, we are extremely honored to welcome Attorney General Josh Stein from the great state of North Carolina as our guest on our COVID-19 scams event. General Stein, thank you so much for being part of today's event.
Yeah, John, it's a pleasure. At this time of COVID, educating consumers is of paramount importance. So I want to thank you and the National Consumers League for putting this together.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I don't think you need much of an introduction, particularly to folks in North Carolina. But for folks who may not be familiar with you, General Stein was sworn in as the 50th Attorney General of North Carolina in 2017. He is the state's top law enforcement officer. This follows a distinguished career as a legislator with the state Senate in North Carolina. And he has been very active for years in helping to protect some of the most vulnerable North Carolinians from frauds and scams of all kinds. General Stein, I hope you won't mind. I'm a history buff, and as somebody who works for an organization that's over 120 years old, I can't help but sort of look into the history of these when we do these events. So a fun fact I wanted to let you know about was that in 1899, when we were founded, the Attorney General of North Carolina was a man by the name of Zeb Vance Walzer. And he was also a member of the North Carolina Senate, as were you.
Very good. That's exciting.
Well, General Stein, I'll get right into it. The Federal Trade Commission has reported a dramatic spike in complaints regarding scammers using the COVID-19 pandemic and the stimulus bill and the economic hardship that we're all facing right now as lures to defraud consumers. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in North Carolina? Is this similar to what the FTC is seeing nationally? And what is your office doing to protect North Carolinians from these frauds?
We are seeing the same things that the FTC is seeing. Basically, what scammers do, what these criminals do, is they strike when they see mass confusion, fear, uncertainty, sort of all of the adjectives that apply to the COVID-19 pandemic, because folks are afraid of getting this virus. We're still figuring it out as we go along. There's so much uncertainty, and people are in financial hardship. We've had more unemployment in this last 4 or 5 months than in any peak moment in the Great Depression. It's the worst unemployment in 85 years. And so this is really, for a criminal, this is their moment they want to exploit. And so we are redoubling our efforts to educate consumers. And that's why I'm really pleased to be with you today to talk about some of the types of scams, the way that the scams are being perpetrated, and what consumers can do to protect themselves.
Great. I saw recently an article in the New York Times where they called this moment El Dorado for scammers and pure hell for consumers. So I couldn't agree with you more. Well, you mentioned sort of some of the particular scams that are affecting North Carolinians. One that I noted in particular are these utility shutoff scams that consumers are hearing about. So last month, Duke Energy reported that they had already received 4,800 complaints about these utility shutoff scams compared to 7,000 complaints for the entire year of 2019. Can you talk a little bit about what your office is seeing when it comes to these utility shutoff scams? I mean, I can, as somebody who grew up in the South, I can tell you being without air conditioning in the middle of the summer, I would certainly be willing to pay a lot of money to avoid losing that. And as I'm sure you're well aware in North Carolina as well.
Currently, the major utilities like Duke Energy, Progress Energy, Carolinas, they cannot cut off people's supply. There's a Utilities Commission rule. However, some of the municipal utilities now can. And so there's confusion about what utilities can and what cannot. As I mentioned earlier, the wave of unemployment that has hit our state and nation has left many people with financial hardship. So you've got a situation where people don't know, are they at risk of losing their utility or not? they're worried they don't have the means to pay their bill, and they may not have paid for the last few months. And so what the scammers are doing is they're calling and saying, hi, I'm with X utility. Duke Energy is the biggest one in North Carolina. You were in arrears on your payments. If you do not pay me right now, I will shut off your energy. And they're asking for payments in prepaid debit cards or gift cards, sort of telltale signals that they're actually not the legitimate utility. And what people need to know is your utility will not do that. They will not call you, threaten you, and demand immediate payment. And in fact, under North Carolina law, you're allowed some kind of repayment plan to make up your arrears. So if you get a call like that, just hang up the phone. Do not give out your personal information. Be very suspicious of if they want some kind of immediate payment, and let my office know. We have a toll-free number, 877-5-NO-SCAM. And we definitely want to hear from consumers when they're hearing scams, because that lets us alert other consumers to beware.
Great. Yeah, resources like the ones you provide to consumers in North Carolina are so important. Definitely we'll mention that number again, I think, at the end of our conversation. But for folks watching on YouTube, if you do have a question for General Stein at the end of our conversation, if we have a few minutes, we'll try and get those in. You can ask those questions in the YouTube chat, and we have folks monitoring that right now. So General Stein, you talked about the sort of financial hardship that people are experiencing in North Carolina. We know that when you're in financial distress, you are especially vulnerable to fraud. As of June 2020, there were more than 360,000 people who have lost their jobs in North Carolina. That's an increase of almost 200,000 from pre-pandemic levels. Many of those people will be applying for unemployment insurance for the first time. And we know that in unemployment insurance commissions across the country are being inundated with sort of fake or phony unemployment benefits applications. We've even heard from consumers who still have jobs, who are getting calls from their HR department wondering why someone is applying for unemployment benefits in their name. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in North Carolina, and what folks in North Carolina who are depending on this really important benefit can do if they think they've been a victim of one of these scams?
Yeah, what folks are doing is, this is a real unfortunate consequence of all of the security breaches we've seen in recent years. Practically the majority of adult Americans have had their Social Security number compromised. And so criminals in India are going online and filing for unemployment with that Social Security number that they bought on the web, and then getting payments. If you are unemployed and you need to get unemployment insurance payments, and you find out when you filed that someone has filed in your name, then absolutely you need to call the Employment Security Commission of North Carolina. It's part of the Department of Commerce, and they can sort it out. It's going to be a major headache, but it can be sorted out, because you are still entitled to your unemployment insurance benefits, even if somebody has falsely filed in your name. In terms of what people can do, it's really difficult. I mean, what we always recommend is take actions to reduce the risk of your personal information being stolen by criminals through identity theft. So protect your personal information. Never give it out on the internet or through an email or by a phone call. That Social Security number is what they will use to exploit you. Beware of phishing emails, those emails that come in that ask you to click on something to provide information. So do what you can to reduce the likelihood your information will be compromised, but you could be the most diligent person in the world, and if Equifax allows somebody to break into their database and take 148 million American Social Security numbers, there's not much you can do about that. So put a security freeze on and just be vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been raising the alarm about data breaches and what consumers need to do to better protect themselves since the Target breach, which seems light years ago. It seems like a small breach now compared to something like Equifax.
And that was mainly credit card, which is, from the consumer's perspective, much less harmful.
Yeah.
Much better to have your credit card stolen than your Social Security number, because you can always get a new credit card, whereas you have the Social Security number for life.
Yeah. Well, I think speaking of the role that technology plays in all of this and keeping our data secure and safe, we know that there are that you're not alone in this fight. Groups like ours are obviously trying to raise alarm, but so are many businesses. We know that sort of there are tech firms who are partnering with federal and state agencies. For example, I read that Google was blocking 240 million COVID-related spam messages per day. That Microsoft has a digital crimes unit that's working with state groups to try and lock down and improve the security of some of these critical infrastructure systems. Can you talk about the role that tech companies are playing in North Carolina in this effort? And I know, for example, in the Research Triangle, well known for being a tech hub. Can you talk about the role that technology companies should play in protecting consumers from these scams? Oh, General Stein, I seem to have lost you there. Are you, can you hear me? Oh, so we have a technical glitch here. Folks, just while we're figuring that out, I will just remind you that if you have a question for General Stein or for the panel that's going to come after our conversation, you can ask those questions in the chat window on YouTube. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment and hopefully we can get General Stein back. Zoom is great when it works.
I am back if you can hear me.
I can hear you great,
General
Stein. Thank you. Sorry about that technical interruption.
It's my, if you can start my video, there you go.
There we go.
The irony that your question had to do with technology when immediately when my Wi-Fi connection went under is not lost on.
Well, I'm glad to be back now.
What I was saying is, since humanity has not changed since humanity existed, which is people will exploit uncertainty and fear to try to steal their money. Increasingly, we're seeing the criminals use technology to try to steal from people. We talked about phishing emails. We talked about, well, we hadn't talked about robocalls, but robocalls are a major source of fraud on people. And so as the criminals use technology to target vulnerable people, it truly is incumbent upon the technology companies to use that same technology to protect us. And so I'm pleased to hear what you reported in terms of Google shutting down a lot of these emails that are coming through. I have put together a coalition of attorneys general, everyone in the country, all 51 of us, and we negotiated a series of anti-robocall principles with the major telecom companies because we want them to deploy technology to block most of these calls from ever coming over the phone line to people's phones. Because if we can stop them from ever coming in, then we can stop the fraud from happening. Of course, we know that some will slip through, and that's why we also need the phone companies to cooperate with us, the technology companies, so that we can then enforce the law against these criminal rule breakers. So technology is critical, and we need the tech companies to step up. I'm grateful for what they've done, and I always ask them to do more.
Great. You know, robocalls are such a huge issue. I just joined a working group that the FCC has put together, looking at how robocalls are affecting hospitals in particular. I mean, for you and me, getting annoying calls on our cell phone is annoyance. When robocalls tie up phone lines in a hospital, that can literally be life or death. So I'm so pleased to hear about the work that you're doing. You know, you talked about vulnerable consumers, and I think, you know, one of the most vulnerable populations that we worry about are seniors in particular. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when it comes to your job as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in North Carolina, can you talk maybe a little bit about what specifically you're doing to help protect seniors from scams during this really difficult pandemic?
Well, a lot of what we do is exactly what we're doing now, which is take every opportunity to educate seniors about the types of scams that are occurring so that they can be prepared. And we also want to educate the general public so that they can let their parents and grandparents know about what's going on out there. So I have partnerships with our state AARP, and we've done a number of scam jam teletown halls, and things like that. One effort that we just did that a whole bunch of attorneys general cooperated on together, bipartisan, is we wrote Congress urging Congress to amend the Victims Compensation Act to allow for seniors who get victimized by fraud to be able to get some compensation through that fund. And we hope that that is something that Congress will take up. And that way, I mean, our first goal is always consumer education protection so that nobody loses a dime. It's so much better to stop the fraud from happening before it does. But if the fraud does occur, and we know that it will, that we want to be able to help the victims get some compensation.
As the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, which is definitely, I think, applies here. General Stein, in the couple minutes we have left with you, we have received a couple of questions on the YouTube chat. One asks, we were talking about robocalls earlier. Are there plans in the works to fight the spoofed numbers issue? For those who aren't familiar with spoofing, this is where scammers impersonate a call coming from, making it look like the call ID says the police department or something else that you'll trust to get you to pick up. So what is your office doing on that number?
That is actually part of what our anti-robocall principles are that we negotiated with the phone companies. There is technology, it's called stir shaken. And what it allows is for the phone companies to put a digital fingerprint on the originating phone call, so that when that call gets transferred from one phone company to another, to another, to another, the digital fingerprint remains, and it forces the call to have the same ID, the phone number on display as the originating number. So this is an example of what I was talking about earlier, that the criminals are using technology to spoof their number so it looks like some other number that may be yours or some family member number. We need the companies, the tech companies, the telecommunications companies, to similarly use technology to track this so that we can make sure that the spoofing doesn't occur. And if that happens, we can dramatically reduce robocalls. Great.
One thing I know that North Carolina is home to a number of major military installations. Folks might not know this, but North Carolina actually has the 4th most active duty military members of any state in the country. The FTC earlier this year reported that active duty service members are 76 more likely than other adults to report an identity theft, misusing existing accounts. And they're 22% more likely to report that their stolen information was used to open a new account. So for service members in North Carolina who may be victims of identity fraud, can they come to you for help when that happens? Are there other resources that are specifically geared towards members of the military to help protect them during this time?
Absolutely. We have a consumer protection specialist who is dedicated to working with service members who experience fraud. If you think about service members, they get a steady paycheck. It's not very much, so they're under financial distress. A lot of times, one of the couples is deployed. They tend to be very young, so they don't have a ton of financial experience. So again, when you think from the mind of a criminal, this is a group that they want to go after. And so they will pitch debt relief, or they'll have automobile scams. They're prone to get identity fraud scams, where the affinity scams, where someone will pretend to be another member of the military to try to build that camaraderie and then exploit that relationship. So they are highly targeted as a community for fraud. And we do a lot of consumer outreach to let people know about what they can do to protect their personal information. Know that if anybody is out there trying to advance you, to give you a loan or to deal with some debt that you may have, and they're charging a fee in advance, that's against the law in North Carolina. So the second somebody says, I can help you financially, just pay me first, they are by definition a lawbreaker, and they're not there to help you. They're there to take from you. So consumer education is, again, a really important part of what we do.
Great. Thank you so much. General Stein, we're coming to the end of our time with you. So I would just ask, is there one message for folks who are tuning in to this live stream or who will be watching the video later on, is there one message that North Carolinians should take away in terms of protecting themselves from this time when COVID scams are so rampant?
Well, all of our lives have been turned upside down by this terrible virus. So many people are sick, so many people have died, so there are families that are in real physical and emotional pain. And then there are many more who have lost their jobs or their livelihoods, and they're in financial distress. And what's awful is that when people are at their lowest, that's when some people, heartless people, criminals, will be striking the hardest, because they want to exploit that fear, that desperation, that pain to steal from you. It's awful, but people need to know that there are criminals out there like that, and they need to put their guard up. If anything comes along your way that sounds too good to be true, or there's any element of suspicion on your side, skepticism, do not go forward with it. Just hang up the phone, call my office at 877-5-NO-SCAM and run it by us, because it is so much better to prevent a fraud from occurring than it is to try to get your money back once it's happened.
I think that's such an important message to share. And I think from our point of view, one thing that we are trying to do, and the message we're trying to communicate to consumers in North Carolina and around the country, is that if you are a victim of fraud, you are a victim of a crime like any other crime. Unfortunately, fraud is one of those crimes where there's often a stigma against reporting it. None of us would hesitate to report if our car got stolen or we got mugged on the street. If you've been a victim of fraud, it is just like being any other victim of crime. So don't be afraid to report it to General Stein's office. That number again is 877-5-NO-SCAM. General Stein, I don't know what to say except for thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of consumers in North Carolina. Thank you for being there to help put an end to some of this fraud and put some of these scammers behind bars, to be honest. And thank you for the work that you and your entire team do to educate consumers in North Carolina every day.
John, I really appreciate it. You take care.
Okay. Well, we're going to let General Stein get back to protecting North Carolinians right now, and we're going to pause for a moment while we transition to our expert panel that'll be coming up in just a moment here. And so while we're waiting for folks to come in, I just want to remind everybody who's watching on YouTube that you can ask questions of our panelists in the chat on YouTube there. And time permitting, we will answer those questions. So I see we have David Kirkman from the AARP of North Carolina. And there is Miss Stella Adams. How are you? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
I can. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we have right here two of, I think, one of the smartest people in North Carolina and around the country when it comes to protecting consumers from frauds and scams. We have with us Stella Adams. She is the housing chair for the North Carolina NAACP, which does not do justice to your amazing story and all the amazing work that you've done. In addition to being the CEO of her own consulting firm, she has also served as the Chief of Equity Inclusion at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. She's a nationally recognized expert on the Fair Housing Act. She's a founding member of the North Carolina Moral Monday movement. And she's been the recipient of far too many awards to list here. I think it ran paragraphs when I looked at it earlier, Stella. So thank you for being a part of today's event.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And then also we have David Kirkman. He is a volunteer with the North Carolina AARP Fraud Watch Network. He is also, I'll be honest with you, a rock star in the consumer protection movement, having spent
Yes.
almost 3 decades with the North Carolina Department of Justice. So I don't know if that was your old boss you were talking to. We were just talking
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
He was my division chief for about 7 years in the early 2000s.
Oh, that's great. David has been at the forefront of protecting consumers in North Carolina, particularly older consumers who may have been experiencing elder fraud, cross-border fraud, telemarketing scams. Over his career, his work has really resulted in millions of dollars in grant funding for the Attorney General's Elder Fraud Project. And now that you've, I guess this is retirement, but you're still doing presentations to seniors across the state on how to spot and avoid scams through your work at the AARP. So David, thank you for everything that you've done, and thank you for being a part of the event.
Glad to be here with you guys.
Great. Well, let's get right into it. I think one of the things that we are inviting you here to talk about today is, as organizations that are on the front line of fighting back against scams targeting North Carolinians, what are you hearing on the ground? What is the data telling you? What are consumers telling you about their experience with these scammers and scams that are just so prevalent during this COVID-19 moment?
Well, I looked at some of the AARP Fraud Watch Network stats last night, and it sort of confirmed a lot of the problems that Attorney General Stein had talked about a minute ago. One that really jumped out at me was the prevalence of romance scams. They are up this year, and they are the scams in which people lose the most money. And that makes total sense in that everybody's being told to stay home, isolate, social distance, don't go to church, don't go to the local pub, whatever you do for recreation or being with your friends, you can't do it anymore. So you're there, you're totally accessible to the elder fraud industry, which is just wanting to come after you anyway. And so the phone's going to ring, you're going to be home, the computer's going to ping, you're going to be there seeing it. You're not going to be with your friends who can say, hey, wait, this guy who wants to be your friend may be a romance scammer. You just don't have your support network out there. So for that reason, it's no surprise that the romance scams are up. But even at the opposite end, where people are a little bit lonely and wanting to adopt pets, dogs or puppies, for instance, there are a lot of scams showing up in the database for AARP Fraud Watch here in North Carolina for people who have been burned by these puppy scams, as they call them. So across the board, there are just all kinds of scams that have come out during this time of trouble and crisis.
Yeah, we've definitely seen those at fraud.org. We do monthly fraud alerts, and those puppy scams are just unbelievable that the scammers are actually getting organized to try and tug at people's heartstrings in that way to defraud them. It never ceases to amaze me. And just for folks who aren't familiar with the Fraud Watch Network, they are an amazing partner for seniors in North Carolina and across the country. They actually have a free helpline that folks can call if you or a loved one suspect you've been a victim of a scam. That number is 877-908-3360. So Stella, you and I had a conversation yesterday to prepare for this event. And one of the things I was fascinated to hear you talk about was these rental scams that you're seeing. We know that, there doesn't seem, there's these moratoriums on eviction that are expiring. So I think we're all worried about folks getting turned out of their homes, which definitely increases their vulnerability to scams. Can you talk about what you're seeing with rental scams?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is an old trick that has metastasized because of COVID. So you have a lot of folks who have just been holding on, if you understand what I'm saying, trying to make those payments and get to the end of their lease term with a good record so they can then, when that lease is up, rent down, right? So they're looking for cheaper apartments because of the uncertainty of the economic times. And because of COVID, and most people now their first search for housing is online anyway. And that's just been enhanced by COVID. So they go online, they see an ad, and the scammers have either stolen the template of a real ad and put a fake address, and they have hijacked that site. So you can see the apartment, you know, because we can't show you the apartment because of COVID, but we can video show you walkthrough. And then because of the payment to pay, you know, person to person payment systems, they can say, well, we'll hold this. Oh, you want this unit? We'll hold it for you, but you've got to send me the deposit and first month's rent through a Cash App. And then the person sends it through the Cash App, and then lo and behold, they find out the unit's not theirs, or the unit's not there, right? But their money is not there either. It's gone, and it's non-recoverable for the most part. And so this scam is happening. People need to be aware of it. Don't pay over the net like that. Make sure you actually see the apartment. If you're out of town, have a friend go by to look to make sure that the apartment is real before you hit that send button.
Yeah, and you know, these payment apps are great for paying friends and family. You know, I just did this the other day. I was paying somebody for a restaurant that we had ordered from, and but those apps are for paying people you know that you've
right
interacted with.
That is a good point. Yes.
Yeah. Don't you know, Zelle and Cash App and PayPal and Venmo are all great, but just know that if you send your money through them and it turns out to be fraud, getting your money back can be extremely difficult. You know, Stella, you raised an important point when you're talking about, if you're out of town, you can send your friends to take a look at an apartment before you put down any money and make sure it's for real. And I think that speaks to the importance of our social support networks and protecting all of us from frauds and scams, particularly at this time right now. But we know that folks are social isolating, particularly seniors. So when so many of us are isolated from our support networks, it can definitely increase our vulnerability to fraud. David, when you work with seniors, how do you talk to them about, what do you say to them, people who may be isolated right now, unable to reach out to friends and family? How do they stay safe from scams at this time?
That's a tough question, especially for people who are particularly physically isolated or they don't have many living friends or relatives anymore. We do encourage them to stay engaged if they can with the local senior centers, area councils on aging in their community, anything that can keep them active, keep them speaking with new friends, meeting new friends, and to also try to avoid friendships with strangers that they meet on the internet, because that's where so many of these romance scams are occurring. That can actually, I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars being lost by individual seniors to these people they meet online. So we tell them to socially interact as best they can with people they know already, to stay vigilant against anybody coming towards them now with saying they've got relief from the economic troubles they're experiencing, or they've got some sort of cure or treatment or test for COVID-19. Also to stay away from strange links that might be coming to them over their cell phone or on their computer, because as soon as they click one of those links upon the invitation of one of these romance scammers or somebody trying to give them a grant, what's going to happen is that link will install malware and spyware into their computer, and the next thing you know, all their bank accounts are drained and their whole personal profile has been stolen. So it's mainly just stay active, stay vigilant, don't click.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point about the role that technology plays. Certainly, while we know that the internet can be a vector for fraud, and that's a big reason why we're we've all gathered today to raise this message. It's also a tool that helps people connect. So even if we can't sort of see each other face to face, particularly if we're older and we may have be vulnerable more to COVID, certainly tools like Zoom and other email, even the old-fashioned telephone. Don't be afraid to pick it up and reach out to your support network for help if you encounter one of these kinds of scams. You talk about romance scams. It's certainly one that we hear about regularly at fraud.org. And while it's not sort of the most frequent scam that we get complaints about, it always seems to be the one where consumers lose the most money. And some of the stories we hear from folks who think that they've found the love of their life who turns out to be a scammer are just truly, truly heartbreaking. And you weren't being hyperbolic when you talked about people losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in these scams.
I met one woman who lost over $1 million to that scam, and it's just, they're so scientific in how they do it.
They really are. They really are. Stella, one of the things that the North Carolina NAACP has really done is highlight the plight of low-wage workers in North Carolina. At a time when sort of job losses stemming from the COVID pandemic seem to be falling hardest on those at the bottom of the wage scale, we know that thousands of North Carolinians are finding themselves in sort of dire financial straits. For folks who are wondering how they're going to pay the next month's rent or put food on the table, someone offering them a financial lifeline online, a sweepstakes or something else like that can be hard to resist. What would you tell the folks in North Carolina who are struggling, who may be wondering how to sort of make ends meet, and how do they spot and avoid these people who offer them a way out of that?
So the first thing I would say to folks is that money will not come knocking on your door saying, take me. And when somebody comes and says, I have money for you unsolicited, that's a red flag that this might not be a good deal. I recently became aware of a businesswoman who took out a loan to try to save her restaurant. She took out a loan online. It was an unsolicited loan, but she took it out because she needed the money. And the terms and conditions of that loan were overwhelming. She couldn't make the payment. Every receipt she made went straight to the person. They had the lender had access to her accounts and just swept her accounts daily. And also people who are facing foreclosure, or if you need to make sure, one, don't pay for a counselor to help you work out something with your mortgage. It's illegal. Is that not right, David? It's illegal to do that on a mortgage, right? And you need to there's free help available all across the country through a HUD approved, hear me, HUD approved housing counselor. And I'm going to give you the 1-800 number to that.
So everybody pull out your pens and write
there
this
you
down.
Go while I find this number. So to find a HUD approved housing counseling agency, if you are facing foreclosure, if you are late on your payments, if you are trying to figure out what all this offerings are, you need to call 800-569-4287. And if you are a small business and you are facing hard times and you're trying to figure out, do I qualify for a PPP? Is there money available for me? And you want to avoid these scam people, you can call the Small Business Administration at 800-827-5722. That's 800-827-5722. 822. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that there is free assistance available. And I'll never just give up on your home or your business. Contact your lender and work something out. And if you're afraid to contact your lender, call these numbers and avoid these predators who are out here trying to take you for the and it's literally take you for your last dime.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message, and Stella, we'll make sure that the numbers you just provided, as well as David, the number for the Fraud Watch hotline. If folks didn't catch those, we're going to put those in the comments and in the description down below this video once it's up on YouTube, so that you all can take advantage of those really, really great resources. And I think, Stella, one thing that you mentioned that I didn't mention, but I think people should be very aware of, is that vulnerability to scams is not just something that individual consumers should be worried about. We hear very often from small business owners who have been targeted by scammers of all stripes. So particularly for small business owners who may be wondering how they're going to keep the lights on. I think the information that you're providing about PPP loans, for example, and how to find the good ones and avoid the scammers is so important. I'm going to switch gears a little bit for a question for both of you. Not a day goes by, I think, that we don't hear about some new miracle coronavirus cure. Just yesterday, I was seeing news that the Russians have figured out a vaccine. And my first thought was like, oh my goodness, we're going to start seeing all these websites pop up offering sort of the Russian coronavirus vaccine for $10. When consumers, seniors or otherwise, go online and they see all of this information out there about coronavirus vaccines, cures, treatments, they are putting themselves at risk of falling victim to fraud. The FTC was reporting just recently a really huge spike in people ordering things online, thinking they're going to get some sort of COVID treatment and either not showing up or something completely different showing up. From your point of view, what's the best way for consumers who are looking, who are being exposed to all this misinformation, to find authoritative information about what's out there, what's available, the steps they should take to protect themselves from COVID and avoid these scams?
Well, I think the best way to protect yourself is to listen to the public health professionals. I mean, they're not into selling anything. They're not running for office. They're the people who really firmly believe and have worked all their life to protect the public against things like this. And if there really wasn't an effective treatment or a cure out there, they would be out there talking about it. And you're not going to learn about something like this through an internet email message or a telephone call. If you get something like that telling you you can get cured or you can be protected, it's an absolute scam. So follow what the real public health professionals are saying.
And so
I completely agree. And in North Carolina, the Department of Health and Human Services has an excellent website that gives daily updates on the impact of the COVID virus in our state. The governor's office has a list of resources available for COVID related programs. And, there are other, I just want to mention that it's not just COVID related scams that go on, but there's also CBD oil. The old-timey medicine man is back, and he's got an internet address. It's selling snake oil. So
that's absolutely true. It seems like these guys always pop up anytime there is sort of confusion about, in this case, COVID. We see these same things popping up. We saw them pop up before with Ebola and with SARS before that. Definitely there are people who are out there trying to take advantage. In the few minutes we have left, if folks who are watching this on YouTube, if you have questions for David or for Stella, you can put them in the chat. We're monitoring that right now, and we'll try and get those in time permitting. in the meantime, Stella, one of the things that I think we've heard a lot about earlier this year was how scammers were taking advantage of the 2020 census to try and get information out of consumers or otherwise defraud them. We know how important filling out the census is to making sure that folks in North Carolina get the resources that they need. What steps would you or you, David, recommend that consumers take to make sure that they don't fall victim to one of these census scams?
So for me, I want to just kind of stress, if you live in North Carolina, please fill out your census form. We're behind the national average, and we're behind our rate of return from 2010, and we need the resources. The census is very important. If a census I'm going to give you 3 things to check when the census taker comes to your door. A census taker should have an official badge with their picture on it that says U.S. Census. They're going to be carrying a tote bag that has United States Census Bureau on it. And what the scammers can't scam is they're going to have a device. And on the back of that device, there's going to be documentation that it is from a census worker. So what you want to do is, if someone comes knocking on your door and they say they're from the census, ask them to turn their device over and show you the back of the device, and then look for the other 2 items. So that's how you can protect yourself between now and September 30th, 30 days, 30th, because that's when the census taking will end. It's a month earlier this year, which means we've got to do a better job. North Carolina needs this money. Your communities need the money that comes from the census count. So it's very, very important that you complete the census. If you are not comfortable filling out the census that way, then go to census.gov and fill the form out there.
Thank you, Stella. David, in the short time we have left, you are somebody who I think has devoted decades of your career to not just public service, but specifically to the public service of protecting North Carolinians from frauds and scams. And now in your role with AARP, you're continuing to do the same thing for seniors. What is the 1 or 2 things that seniors watching today's event should take away when it comes to taking steps to protect themselves from frauds and scams linked to this COVID-19 pandemic?
The most important thing to know is that there is a multi-billion-dollar international elder fraud industry out there. It has grown from almost nothing to this huge colossus in the last 30 years. Very high tech, very savvy, very smart, and they're out there and they're ready for us. All of us who are over 65, they're coming after us. And it's also important for seniors and any people who have parents or grandparents, aunts and uncles who are over 65, to be mindful of what's being targeted against their loved ones, and to stay close to them, to network with them, to talk to them more than they have been perhaps in the past. Because again, we were talking about isolation a minute ago, how that is one of the 12 main vulnerabilities for senior fraud. And so the closer we can come to our friends and neighbors and our loved ones who are older, the more important it will be in fighting this elder fraud industry.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. We hear from seniors constantly. I was just on the phone the other week with folks who had a woman who had sent $800 in gift cards to somebody for I believe it was an imposter scam. So definitely can +1 what you said about this being a very organized, multi-billion-dollar criminal underground that's out there to target seniors and other consumers as well. Stella, I'll give you the last word. What is the one message that you want folks who are tuning in today to take away when it comes to protecting themselves from COVID-19 related scams?
To be vigilant. It is so important that we understand that no one's going to offer you money for free. And if you have to pay for the opportunity, then there's a problem. That's a red flag. Be vigilant. We're aware, and they are aware of your vulnerabilities because of this virus. And so you have to protect yourself from these predators. Be vigilant. That's the best words I can give you.
Well, that is fantastic parting advice. David and Stella, thank you for all of the work that you do on behalf of consumers in North Carolina, not just today, but every day. You know, the work of fraud fighting is unfortunately one that goes on every day. I wish it was a crime that we could see the light at the end of the tunnel on. But I think with folks like you helping us all stay vigilant, as you put it, Stella, will help many more people hopefully avoid falling victims to these scams. So thank you both so much for your time today. Again, this event will be has been recorded. It will be on YouTube. If you have friends or loved ones who have talked to you just in conversations about scams they may have heard of, or they know people who have been defrauded, share this video widely. I think the information that General Stein provided, as well as the information that David and Stella have provided, and the work that their organizations are doing on this issue is so important and deserves to be more widely known. So David, Stella, thank you so much for being part of today's event. We really appreciate you making time for us. Take care, everybody.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.